Welcome. This is a cyber class number 27 on exchange rates and international finance, taking the place of class on December 7th. I regret I'm away in Washington today, but I hope that this class is helpful to you. First, some announcements. Problem set 9 is on Blackboard. Go ahead and have a crack at that. It covers some of the issues in the government chapter about public and private saving, about foreign saving, about investment. It also covers exchange rates and international trade. So please complete this before the review session in class on Thursday. That would help you prepare some of your questions, I think. And please come with questions to the review session in class on Thursday, the 9th. In part to make up for the fact that this is a cyber class, I regret that I have to be away. I will be in my office all day on Wednesday, the 8th of December. So I will be away. There is no class on Tuesday the 7th, but I will be in my office all day on Wednesday, in part to make up for that. As I said last time, this is a special time of the year. Course evaluations are a very important part of college life. So you can go to this URL. It's clickable in the slides. It might even be clickable on the screen here, although I sort of doubt it. Your opinion matters for professors getting tenure, including my own. And for each course you evaluate, it turns out you also have a chance to win these fabulous prizes. Now, I've never seen anybody who has actually won these, but I'm told that this actually happens. You can win a parking pass, a netbook, an iPod, and much more. What exactly, I'm not sure, but if you toss your hat in the ring, I guess you get to find out, and that would be good. Here's where we have been, and here's where we are. So we're in the blue class here on the 7th. Class is canceled. I'm in Washington at a conference on veterans readjustment, so we're serving the nation. We're not serving you. I regret that we're not. I hope again that this class is helpful in some regard, and I again will be around all day on Wednesday the 8th to make up for this and also for the review session on Thursday the 9th during regular class time. So next time on the 9th, a Thursday, is an in-class review of everything. Please do bring questions. The final exam is on the 14th, which is coming up very soon. It's just a week from this upcoming Tuesday. It will be here in Remsen 100 during normal class, that is in the normal class location, from 1:45 in the afternoon to 3:45. Plan on writing an exam that will take the entire time. Well, where were we last time? We were thinking about how U.S. exports might rise if our currency depreciated. Why might that happen? Well, it turns out that if the currency depreciates, then if all other things are equal, most importantly including the prices of these goods in the currency units, if the exchange rate changes, if the value of the currency falls, then U.S. goods actually look like they're cheaper compared to foreign goods. Why might exports increase? It's because foreigners would see that given the currency depreciation, our goods are now cheaper, and so they would substitute away from other goods, whether it's their own or goods from, say, China, Japan, or Germany, or something like that, and they would buy more of our goods. But then you might ask yourself, can this last forever? Well, no, and it's because when demand for our goods rises in this fashion, what will eventually happen to the prices of our goods? Well, they will be bid up. So we might call this arbitrage in goods. Arbitrage is a word, that's an SAT vocabulary word. It means that people are buying low and selling high and making a profit, and that process will raise the price of whatever they're buying low. Well, there has to be some kind of an equilibrium here, right? So if our currency depreciates, people start buying our goods more, well, the prices will rise up to some new equilibrium level. The prices of our goods obviously can't rise forever, and it turns out what will happen is they will rise just enough to eliminate further arbitrage profits. So in economics, we like to have these conditions of no arbitrage. That's what defines equilibrium, and there is one here. It's called this, the law of one price. And the argument is that in the long run, it has to be the case that currency traders will bid the prices of exchange rates, but also people who sell goods will bid the prices of goods to the same level internationally. So they buy low, sell high as much as they can, and what that does is move prices around the globe to the point at which everything is actually priced the same across every economy, after accounting, of course, for the exchange rate. And so at this point of equilibrium then, arbitrage profits would be zero. Nobody would have incentives to export or import any more beyond that. Well, this is the law of one price. What form does this take? Well, let's think about the price in foreign currency units of a particular object, and this is going to be the price index ultimately, but the notation in the text is the following. So W means world, so PW means the price of either a good or just a whole array of goods that are, say, produced in Britain, if we're talking about the British pound here. That price must be equal to the price in dollars translated by the exchange rate. So our exchange rate from the perspective of the United States is going to be pounds per dollar, the foreign currency units per dollar. And you can see that if we define E in this way, that's going to be the price of the dollar. Namely, that if that rises, pounds per dollar rises, that means you've got to give up more pounds to get a dollar. And that's the same as a currency appreciation. Our dollar is worth more pounds. So that's good, that we want it to be like that. And so it will work out here that PW is in pounds, and P is in dollars, and E is in pounds per dollar. So on the right-hand side, P times E will cancel out the dollars, because there's dollars in the denominator and in the numerator of P, and so all you're left with is pounds. That matches the left-hand side. For example, suppose you see a Big Mac that sells locally for $3.10. If the exchange rate is equal to ½ a pound per dollar, then in Britain the price should be what? Well, how would you figure that out? Well, PW is what you're solving for. It's the price in Britain of this Big Mac. P is the price in dollars. E is the exchange rate there, and it's 1/2. So PW has to be 1/2 of $3.10 in terms of pounds. So it actually is £1.55. Half of 310, but then translated into pounds because we're translating it with the exchange rate. Well, you might wonder whether this law of one price is really very realistic or not, and if you think it's not, you're not alone. The text talks about the famous Big Mac Index that's published by The Economist magazine, which you may have seen, or may have read the magazine, you may have actually seen the index. And typically what is found is that data on Big Mac prices indicate, in fact, these things are priced quite differently across countries. So using nominal exchange rates, Big Macs cost something like $3.10 in the United States, $1.31 in China, $3.77 in Europe. And this is kind of getting at this issue of whether exchange rates are in fact in equilibrium or not. The Big Mac in China is cheaper, and what that's telling you is that other things equal, you'd want to import the Chinese Big Mac to the US. Sounds silly, but that's the point, is that if it's cheaper there, $1.31 in China is lower than $3.10 in the United States. You'd actually, sitting in the United States, would prefer to have a Chinese Big Mac. That's why the Chinese have a trade surplus with us. That's kind of the statement here, is the exchange rate facilitates exactly that. And if anything, the reverse ought to be going on with Europe. The Big Mac is more expensive in Europe than it is in the US. You might wonder, of course, who in their right mind would actually import and export Big Macs, and that's true, that nobody ought to. There are White Castle hamburger lovers out there who might do something crazy like this, but typically these things are produced locally, and they're what's called technically non-tradable goods or non-traded goods. These things are not, in fact, shipped across borders. It's silly to think that they are. Still, the law of one price, when applied to national price indexes, makes a lot of sense. It tells us what the long-run nominal exchange rates ought to be, and it's this math. The exchange rate ought to be the world price divided by the domestic price level. And so if you think about it in terms of average price levels, this is not a bad point of departure. Well, what's a price level, you might wonder? Well, a price of a Big Mac makes sense. If there are a lot of different goods and services, though, it starts to make a little bit less sense what a price index or price level might actually be, and we're not going to really care. What we're going to care about is, after we're using the growth rate rules on this, notice that it's a ratio, and so you can take the growth rate of both sides. And so what we're going to do is look at the rate of growth in the exchange rate and the rate of growth of these two price indexes. And so the rates of growth of those price indexes are the rates of inflation here versus abroad, and that gives us some insight into what the exchange rate ought to be doing over long periods of time. So in the long run, our story is going to be that the nominal exchange rate should reflect the rates of inflation here versus the rates abroad. If you start with the law of one price, that the exchange rate ought to be equal to the foreign price level over the domestic, and here you can make this intuitive to yourself. PW is in terms of pounds, let's say it's a price level abroad in Britain, and P is in terms of dollars, so it's pounds per dollar, just like the exchange rate we're thinking of. It always has to be foreign per domestic so that an increase in it gets us to an appreciation. Well, the growth rate of the exchange rate using the growth rate rules is this. GE is equal to the difference of these two things. Ratios, when taking the growth rates, become differences. Now, because the growth in the price level is equal to inflation, what we're finding is that the growth in the exchange rate should be equal to the foreign inflation rate minus ours. Well, so you might wonder what would happen to the exchange rate over long periods of time if domestic inflation, pi, so our rate of inflation, suppose that's higher than the world rate of inflation, pi w. Well, using this math, the answer is that GE will have to be negative because pi w is smaller than pi. You're subtracting off a larger piece than you have to start with. And that's a statement that the dollar ought to be depreciating. Well, have we actually seen this happen? Well, here's a plot now of inflation over time. And what we see here is different rates of inflation. During the 1970s, all countries were having problems with inflation. But then a big gap opened up, especially with Japan being very different from the other industrialized countries. The U.S. is the blue line, and most recently we have had higher rates of inflation than Japan. Japan actually has a problem with negative inflation. The zero in this graph you can see actually is above some of the Japanese numbers there. The other thing to mention is that so FR/GE/IT is a weird way of denoting the euro area. That's most of Europe, although not all of it. And since 1999, when the euro was formally introduced, U.S. inflation has also been a little bit more rapid than euro area inflation. So we have had more rapid inflation than both of those two areas, especially more rapid than Japan. And so you might wonder, well, based on that, how have exchange rates in fact behaved? Well, the yen-dollar rate is this blue thing, and that shows maybe a little bit less dramatic decline since, say, 1990 than you might imagine. In fact, the current exchange rate is more like 80. So we have seen more of a rapid decline very recently in the last couple of years. This data is only through 2006, I believe. But over the long run, it does pick up this long-run decline in the value of the dollar. So the dollar is appreciated against both currencies. The highest rate of the yen-dollar exchange rate in recent memory, well, I guess if you go back to 70, it might be higher, but highest in 1985, and then in fact a bunch of government officials got together and figured out a way to bring down the value of the dollar, and this was sort of a thing at the time. Well, it's a lot like what we're facing with China right now, actually, very similar parallels. A very wide swing in the euro-dollar rate after the introduction of the euro. So what happened initially is that the dollar strengthened. You can see it first fell quite a bit and then strengthened a lot back to the top and then started to fall again. And this is fairly consistent with what we see in terms of the relative inflation rates, that the exchange rates have pretty much all declined because inflation in the U.S. actually has been a little bit higher than it has been elsewhere. Because YouTube has a limit on time, I'm going to stop now and stop this recording and begin the next one.